I need practice.
And I am 100% serious that you should put lovers, dreamers, and me in this intro.
For lovers, dreamers, the Old Testament lectionary podcast for lovers, dreamers,
And
To
me,
quote
Rosie
Kermit the
Candle.
Frog.
Yes. Okay. All right. So let's start. Okay. Welcome to First Reading, the Old Testament lectionary podcast for lovers, dreamers, and me. Kermit the Frog, better known as. I, however, am Rosie Candle, a candidate for PhD in Hebrew Bible at Emory University.
And I'm Dr. Rachel Wren, ordained Lutheran pastor and assistant professor of biblical studies at Trinity Lutheran Seminary at Capital University.
And I'm here too. I'm Tim McNinch. I'm another PhD candidate at Emory University. We have all three First Reading co-hosts together for a party episode. A party episode on the lectionary text for this week, which is, it's somewhere in 1 Samuel 2.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's the lectionary text is actually 1 Samuel 2, 18 to 20 and 26, which is a little bit, we'll talk about that. But as we looked at this, we also wanted to focus in on 1 Samuel 2, 1 to 10, which is the poem, the song that Hannah sings. Which we just couldn't pass by that without devoting a big chunk of this to talking about that. So
yeah, I mean, it was so funny because as I was prepping this text, I was thinking about this is the first Sunday after Christmas. And I don't know about y'all's tradition, but in the Lutheran Church, a lot of times what we do the first Sunday after Christmas is a lessons and carols Sunday. So instead of following necessarily the lectionary, it'll be just some of those favorite Christmas texts and some of those favorite Christmas songs as well that will be interspersed throughout the service. And then there's no real sermon. There might be like a short meditation or homily or that sort of thing. So when I was thinking about this text, I was like, man, this would work perfectly because this is a song. Like, what a great text to have as a meditation text for Lessons and Carols Day, because this is kind of one of the, this is the precursor to Mary's Great Magnificat. I mean, there's just so much in this that makes it appropriate for that Christmassy time period.
yeah, but before we get to Hannah's song, really we should at least say something about the actual lectionary text, right? Which is 18 to 20 and 26. It's short. Can I read it for us real quick?
Yeah.
So it's just these few verses. This is after Samuel's born, of course. I'm reading from the JPS. Samuel was engaged in the service of the Lord as an attendant, girded with a linen ephod. His mother would also make a little robe for him and bring it up to him every year when she made pilgrimage with her husband to offer the annual sacrifice. Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife and say, "May the Lord grant you offspring by this woman in place of the loan that she made to the Lord." Then they would return home. For the Lord took note of Hannah. She conceived and bore 3 sons and 2 daughters. Young Samuel, meanwhile, grew up in the service of the Lord. And then I guess verse 26 is, young Samuel, meanwhile, grew in esteem and favor, both with God and with men.
Which is, of course, a similar way that Jesus is described in Luke after he has his incident at the temple where he is left behind and enjoys it, and then goes home and is obedient to his parents and grows in esteem.
Yep.
Yeah.
With people and with the Lord.
Yeah.
So you're saying that Luke may have known the Old Testament?
Luke was a good scriptural writer.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a fascinating text. I mean, I can just dive right in because there were so many things that I was just thinking through as I came and was working on this text a little bit. So first of all, just a little Hebrew note. I always think it's funny when we do so much translating of some things and then other things we just leave in the Hebrew as if we're supposed to just sort of divine what it is. So a linen ephod.
Oh, yeah. What's an ephod?
Well, right. Yeah, exactly. It is just a linen cultic garb, usually worn by priests or priestly attendants in this place. So, there's everything special and nothing special about it at the same time. It's
the uniform.
The uniform, exactly.
Of a priest.
Yeah.
I was more struck by the little robe.
Yes.
That there's something so evocative about this. I think, and I've just recently weaned my own daughter, so the idea of this small garment, it just strikes me with his vulnerability of both, not just the linen ephod, which, communicates a certain sacredness of his work, his ministering, but the tiny robe kind of got my heartstrings there, where I was like, oh, can you imagine leaving him, at that young age and not knowing what his daily life was like. So I just picked up, Junia from preschool. She has a life there that I'm not fully, part of. And I can't imagine for Hannah what that might have been like.
Yeah. Oh, that's one of my favorite moments in scripture is just his mother used to make for him a little robe and take it to him every year. I mean, it's just like every parent in the room is just like, oh, I'm melting at that point.
I can't get out of my head like the scene in Harry Potter where Mrs. Weasley makes a Christmas sweater each year for her children, each of her children, including Harry in that particular year as a surrogate child. But that sense of like every year she would bring him, the next size up or whatever, like a little robe to keep him warm.
I was just thinking about the materiality of it too, like there's just something so common about this. Like every parent knows that, around Christmas, you get kind of give new clothes because the kids are literally growing out of them. And so there is something about this passage that is very real, and resonant with regular human life.
It is. And I feel like that's one of the things that even in this itty bitty passage could be a really sweet preaching point, which is just this concept of the ways we are able to show up for each other. And sometimes in ways that maybe aren't our ideal way of showing up, but we still show up for each other. Does she wish she could have been there more with him? Does he wish his mom would have been around more? We don't have any answers to those questions, but we do know that when she was able to show up for him, she showed up. And what would a sermon like that be about just what does it look like to be present for each other in whatever way we can, especially after a time period when we've been around lots of family and maybe haven't been present in the way we've wanted to be, but we've still shown up. What does a sermon look like that kind of takes that angle of it?
Or even in a year where the idea of showing up is fraught because of a disease or, of a sickness that's passing and we're not sure, so there's this sense of maybe being absent where you'd like to be present, or absenting oneself to protect another, right? And so Hannah's both presence and absence in Samuel's life allows him to serve and become who we, know in this text. But, there's the human sense of this too, and the movement through festivals where we're part of each other's lives in ways that we're not on a daily level. So there's something special about this moment and this particular Christmas that I'm thinking of, with the background of so much uncertainty in terms of where we're going. I don't know.
I do. There's just another little note about this that I find so very delightful.
Bring it.
Which is that, so in the beginning of the story begins with family tension because Hannah has a sister wife, or Elkanah has another wife. So there's a tension there in that relationship based on the relationship that Elkanah has with each of his wives, but also their children that they are or are not able to produce. And here, there's no other wife. At this point in the story, she's kind of disappeared, and there's all sorts of feminist critique we could do with that. But what I found fascinating is the spotlight that is on Hannah in these couple of verses. So it starts off with Samuel ministering, but then it talks about what his mother made for him and then where she would go with him, with her husband. And then Eli would give them a blessing, but the blessing is for the gift that Hannah made to the Lord, not that y'all together made.
Yeah.
And so there's just a real kind of beautiful spotlight on this woman's agency and position, which has been totally flipped from what it was before.
The other thing that I was really struck by in the Hebrew too is, so when Tim read the translation, this is from the JPS, right? Because I also have the NRSV open in front of me, right? And so the word loan is there in the JPS.
Mhm.
It's gift in the NRSV, right? So, and I was looking at the Hebrew and I'm like, there's so much wordplay that's going on here between asking, requesting, giving, being granted, and so there's this beautiful back and forth that in this maybe season of gift giving of what we've received and then also what we're giving, and this back and forth of relationship in which we give things and we receive things at the same time. And there's this idea of maybe we're loaning this for a certain amount of time, but it's really still also partially mine. So there's this thing that's between us, and so Samuel is a gift and he's a gift that's been given. And then he continues to be this kind of, marker for Hannah of God's graciousness, generosity, and also Hannah's graciousness and generosity. I mean, on the part of all mothers or parents, just looking at what Hannah is doing every year in both celebrating the gift that she's been giving and at the same time giving it back, And so, I mean, for those of us that are parents, I think there's also that sense that is exactly what raising kids is. It's she's both mine and then totally not mine.
Right.
It's another way that this little snippet kind of adds quite a lot to the story, because you could read the earlier part of this story from a perspective that sees Hannah kind of using this pregnancy and birth of Samuel instrumentally for her own gain, her own status, as if, just give me a son. I'll drop him off at the temple, but I won't be barren anymore, right? I'll be a full woman by the standards of my culture, right? So you could see this whole thing as sort of instrumental. But then when it comes time to drop him off, she says to her husband, well, let's wait until he's weaned. Give me another, few months, a year, something, just some time with him. And then I'll bring him. I'll fulfill my vow. And when she does, she doesn't lose all contact with him. She continues to visit year after year, bringing gifts. So like you're saying, it's a very touching portrait of the love and the contact between this mother and son.
Yeah.
Well, Hannah is, it's interesting that you mentioned, Rachel, Peninnah, the other wife, and how the focus in this whole story is really on Hannah. In fact, from a narrative point of view, we get more insight into her inner life, her thoughts, the things she says, her own perspective on the situation than we do any of the other characters, other male characters, by the way.
Right.
So this is really, really unusual. And that's probably a good transition then to talking about Hannah's song, that beautiful poem, verses 1 to 10 in chapter 2. Let's just throw it open. Like, what do you all see in this? What's going on here that struck you as you were looking at it? Rosie, you mentioned as we were getting ready for this that the Hebrew's a little, it's on a different level from some of the surrounding prose, you might say.
Right. I mean, I struggled as I was looking at this. I was like, I keep having to look up stuff or, and then forms like, why is it in, why is this in the Hiphil? Why is this passive maybe? But I mean, the thing that's, first of all, on the top level that struck me is this imagery is so forceful and so fierce, right? And the gamut of what she's talking about. So she begins by saying, my heart exults in the Lord, my strength is exalted in God, my mouth derides my enemies. And so the imagery in the Hebrew is her mouth is open wide, like the slavering jaws of a lion, and I was like, whoa, that's an opening image, of this like wide open mouth laughing, and there's a violent fierceness to this that I am really kind of struck by and all over again surprised by, and I rejoiced in my victory. So there's the sound of a military, like almost of an army coming forth from this woman. And so like that's quite an opening salvo, on the heels of having birthed this child or what this child means, but also the idea that she's juxtaposing this birth for her is on par with a military victory, or with the idea of an animal opening its jaws, like as in that opening roar, as they're about to charge, and I'm just like, girl.
Awesome.
Yes.
It's just like, if you're thinking about character too, it's like this is not some crying in the corner,
Yeah.
somebody who's like just coming off of, just she's huge.
Yeah.
She's just a huge character with a lot of personality, and she's thoughtful. So she's drawing from real life and then putting her position, her life and her struggle right in parallel
Yeah.
with what is going on in Israel's national picture. Like that's huge.
Well, and not only that, but she's also kind of putting herself in parallel with a kingly figure, because a lot of times when these songs of rejoicing over battles are sung, they're sung by a kingly figure. And she's like, you know what, king, take a back seat for a minute, because this, what just happened to me, is on par with that, as you said. And that's huge.
I mean, just to interject with like a little source critical analysis here, it's pretty much universally recognized within biblical scholarship that this poem wasn't original to the book of Sam, the narrative part of Samuel here, but that it was put here after the fact by an editor at some stage. And you can read that a couple ways. You can read it as, oh, well, let's deconstruct, then like take these apart. But I like to see that as at some point in the history of the composition of this text, somebody had this poem that thought this fits perfectly right here.
Exactly.
So interestingly, it probably originally was a royal psalm.
Yeah.
Like in the voice of the king.
That makes sense.
And it was recycled, repurposed here in Hannah's voice.
Sit down, king. Someone else is going to sing this song.
And I love, Rosie, that you brought out the gaping mouth. I mean, that's literally in the text, right? Rachav pi.
Yeah.
My mouth is wide. And
you
in
can't
addition
see it,
to sort
listeners,
of
but all of us are going with huge jaws right now.
That's a great image, because in the narrative part of the text, Hannah's struggled to find a voice, right? Like she's mumbling silently. No sound is coming out of her mouth, and Eli thinks she's drunk, and that whole interchange happens where she's just trying to like find her place within her society, but because she's a barren woman, she has no standing, she has no voice. And once the gift of God comes and this child comes, it's like that roar, that her mouth opens, her heart leaps out, and it's this, here I am Hannah, I am woman, hear me roar.
Yeah, right.
It's awesome.
I'm getting chills just thinking too about the tradition of women's victory songs too. I'm thinking of Deborah.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Miriam.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of like a chorus of voices of women who are, even if it's an insertion, to me, there's a community that's saying, this is what these women sound like as we look back on them. This is the kind of roar they make through our tradition. This is how, we want to underscore their voices. And within their tradition, there's this canonical kind of, I don't know what it is, emphasis, exclamation around these women's lives and their struggles. They're not just hidden in the shadows. These are part and parcel with the story of Israel.
Yeah.
As much as any of our kings.
Yes. Well, and I think, just to kind of bring that full circle, another really beautiful thing that comes out of that composition theory of this is most likely scribes were men. And so what's really beautiful about this is that means when someone put this song here in this woman's mouth, it was a man being like, you know what? This is what she should sound like. She should sound like our kings. And I just think that's a really important testament to what it's like when men act like feminists and when men lift up women's voices. And here we see it kind of in the text. Probably can't make it into a sermon, but I think that's really cool.
Hey, I'll add a cheer for male allyship. All right.
Amen. Amen.
And just to put an exclamation point on this, one of my favorite verses in it is down in verse 9, which I hope we'll come back to again for another part of it. But the first part of it, the Hebrew is Raglei Chasidav Yishmor Urashaim Bachoshek Yedamu. The feet or the steps or the pathways of the Chasidav, God's faith, the ones who participate in God's faithfulness. And that could be this community of women that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
God will guard their steps, will watch over their path. But the wicked, the Rashaim, it says, Bechoshek, in darkness, Yedamu, they will be silenced.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
They will be silenced. So there's the whole poem is a big reversal. We'll talk about that, I'm sure. But here is kind of the exclamation point on it, that those who have been bombastic becomes silenced, and the one who's been silent finds her voice. I think that's a really beautiful moment in the poem.
Yeah. What else did you see in the text that was preaching worthy?
Well, we haven't really touched on this theme of reversal. I mean, we touched on it, but not really kind of gone into the deep dive that this poem takes on, the flip, 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 flip over and over again.
Yeah. What are some of those flip?
The bows of the mighty are broken in verse 4. The faltering are girded with strength. Men once sated must hire out for bread. Men once hungry hunger no more. While the barren woman bears 7, the mother of many is forlorn. And then there's death, and then there's life, poor, and then rich. He casts down, he lifts high, so it's like back and forth, from the bottom to the top, and there's something that's about both the vast gamut of human life and then also the kind of vertical dimension of what's going on with, between God and humanity. There's just, I'm so struck by this passage once again.
Yeah. And as long as you're reading the JPS, you have to keep going to God lifts up the needy from the dunghill.
Yeah.
What an image.
Yeah.
Right. She's not afraid to use like some pretty, I don't know if I can use shit here, but that's what's going on, right? She's saying like, yeah, you think that's shitty. Like here's what God does, can pull you out of that dump.
Yeah. Right. But then the third piece of that verse is, for the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and on them God has set the world, which is a fascinating way to end reversal, because you would expect the world turned upside down, but it's almost like the world already is upside down. And what God is doing in this process of reversal is setting it right, is setting it where the pillars are supposed to be.
That'll preach.
Yeah.
There you go.
I love the idea of God making things right, right? Because there is just sort of sometimes a sense of helplessness, and that's maybe only appropriate to our position. We don't have the power to do these kinds of things. We can hope, we can pray, we can imagine they'll happen in our own lifetime, but this is a prayer that rings for all of us that are experiencing need, or vulnerability this year, or just, sitting close with our inability to change some things in our own lives or in the lives of others or in our congregations or in our families, and so it's not up to us in the end. Hannah's saying it's God.
Absolutely. I want to throw in a pitfall here. Preaching pitfall. I really love the potency of this reversal of fortunes theme. And you guys know, this is a big theme throughout the scriptures, and especially in the poetry of the scriptures and the Psalms. Like, reversal of fortunes comes up over and over and over. You also have to be careful when you're preaching it, not to generalize it in a way that makes it sound like you're saying to your congregation, hey, God will make sure everything always works out. It's all going to be fine. Anything that you're experiencing now where you feel like put down, God's going to raise you up, and all of your financial failures, you're going to end up being successes. And you don't want to put blame on those whose circumstances aren't changing for the better. Or make them feel like they're missing out on some sort of ethereal blessing that everybody else is getting. You want to just make sure that you acknowledge that this is a theological statement about what God's about in general, making the world right. But that doesn't mean that you can expect that every circumstance that you face is going to turn out good for you by your evaluation of it, just because, Hannah's singing a song about it.
I think that's a really worthy point to lift up. And I wonder if then sitting in that literary context can help ground us in a place that keeps us a little bit away from that pitfall, because Hannah's singing this out of a position where you got to think she's not happy to be leaving, or some part of her isn't happy to be leaving her son behind. So even though she's singing about this great reversal, her life still doesn't necessarily reflect the fullness of that, even if for a moment it reflects a piece of that. And perhaps that's a way to contextualize this song in a way that would help. What do you think?
Yeah, one of the preaching pitfalls that I was thinking about with this text is for people that struggle with, for instance, barrenness or infertility, and seeing Hannah, exonerated or blessed in this way can make you feel your own pain more acutely in that, you sort of see that But that is a reality of the holidays too, and
Yeah.
Instagram culture and Facebook culture, where you see, maybe a Hannah rejoicing over the birth of their child, but what it can do is underscore the pain of some of our congregations to just simply be about like the joy and celebration of the holidays
Mm.
without also acknowledging that many people are not feeling that or are feeling a mix of that. That's a preaching pitfall that I've always felt with the Hannah song. People that don't experience family this way either. For women that have given up children for adoption, or for women that have adopted, like there's something here for them in the story. And I'm glad you're bringing out that Hannah's celebration is not all joy. There's a real struggle in even her, in this firstborn. Samuel's life certainly doesn't go straight.
Yeah, right.
Can you imagine? And then when we think about Luke and Jesus and Mary and, all of us that sometimes watch really hard things even in the midst of being given that thing that we most desired, is the pain of being given that thing you've most desired, and it's not something you can control.
Yeah. Another thing that might be exegetically helpful here, in Hannah's situation, she's experienced this little personal reversal, this victory in her life, but in the poem, in the song, she frames it as that it's not just about her, that this is something that's about God and about God's people as a whole. And sets it in that communal context. We've mentioned that a couple of times, but it's worth really emphasizing that she sees what's going on with the birth of this particular child as being about what God's doing on a bigger scale among the people as a whole. And that same idea is echoed in Mary's Magnificat, that she's experienced a pregnancy, and yet this is about God being faithful to the people as a whole. Like God's about something bigger here. The other little pitfall here related to this theme of the reversal of fortunes, and maybe I come to this more naturally as a white male reader, there's this urge to always automatically side with those who get elevated in the story.
Right.
I'm one of the lowly who God's going to elevate and put up on this with the princes, right? But I think that it's important to also read this looking for the places where we might see ourselves among the high and mighty who need to get brought down so that the lowly can be elevated. And that gives another sort of way to read the text.
Yeah, that was certainly like one of the points that I thought you were underscoring too, is for American congregations. That is the movement from independence and from individual celebration of, particular accomplishments that we want to make, versus connecting that to a community and being able to say, how does this maybe individual thing that I'm so thrilled about connect to a larger whole? I think as Americans, it's always a challenge to kind of see ourselves as part of that larger work. And always a good thing for American congregation to be pushed a little bit, to be like individual happiness versus like communal wholeness, goodness, reparations, like that kind of thing. Where does this make my community more whole, more safe, more loving, more generous? Like how do these things that are, going well in my life contribute to that?
Absolutely. Well, how about preaching angles? Was there anything that stuck out to you in particular that was like, you know what, this is the preaching point I would take?
The one that I was really kind of struck by is the way the wordplay of the word ask, sha'al that keeps coming. It was really resonating for me as, what am I asking for in this season? What have I received? What am I being asked to give? What am I being asked to give up? And so the word, it's being given, receiving, asking, petitioning, all of those synonyms that are, I don't know, they were being played with throughout this narrative in ways that I couldn't ignore for my own life. Which is like, what am I being asked of in this season? What am I being asked to give up in particular? I think especially becoming a new mom and thinking about that over this last year, a lot that's gone on in this year. So maybe it's a moment for reflection, for both gratitude and also mourning. So that's, to me, the angle that I would take on these passages.
That's a really timely angle too, because this will be right around the new year when people think about the last year and reflect on it and start to think about moving forward, what is being asked of them, what's being asked to give up. So that just could be a really nice angle into this text.
Yeah. I ask myself when I read this poem, like, what's the call here? What's the invitation? One of the big points of the poem, and really in this whole section of the book of Samuel in the Bible, is this invitation to put trust in God. That finding success is not about asserting personal ambition. And that's where I come back to verse 9 again, which is sort of been my landing point in this poem. The last little line in verse 9 says, Ki lo v'choach yigba ish.
Oh, do that again one more time. That's so pretty.
Ki lo v'choach yigba ish. A person doesn't succeed, achieve success. The verb yigbar is related to the noun gibor, which is sort of like
the strong
hero.
man.
The strong guy. Yeah. In modern Hebrew, it's the word for a superhero. Like you don't achieve heroic status. You don't become a hero. You don't gain power through acts of personal ambition. It's the ones who are people of chesed with God. God watches over their paths. God takes care of them. God supervises their future. And it's the ones who are struggling to assert their own ambition that get brought down. One of the themes in the whole section of Samuel is how God is able to bring about the divine will without people trying to bring it about by their own personal ambition.
For it is not by acts of might that one becomes a superhero. There's almost this weaving of a theme that's going on here between her song and her act, which is, if not a template for us, maybe some inspiration for us in the new year.
Well, we envisioned this as a party episode, right? And it really has been a party, hasn't it?
Absolutely.
I love this.
Yeah.
I feel inspired personally.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just sort of like, ooh.
Well, that sounds like a fantastic place to wrap it up. Friends, we hope that you found something worthwhile to preach in this conversation. It sure was fun for us, and we hope you enjoyed it as well. Thank you, as always, to Trinity Lutheran Seminary at Capital University for a generous grant. Thank you to those of you who are listening. And let us know, give us some feedback. Send us an email, firstreadingpodcast@gmail.com, or talk to us on the website or on Facebook. We'd love to get some feedback. Until next time, I'm Dr. Rachel Wren.
I'm Rosie Candethal.
And I'm Tim McNinch. Happy Christmas to you all.
Yay!
What's the line from the Muppets? That would be a good one. Something the dreamers and me. Or
the lovers, the dreamers, and me.
I think that would be the perfect intro. The Old Testament Lectionary podcast for
lovers,
the dreamers,
and me.
If you haven't tuned out already.
That's fantastic.